Greetings, friends. It's a privilege as well as a pleasure to speak with you today on the theme of spiritual responsibility and human perfectibility. Let us begin at the beginning, which is sacred. Let us also keep in mind the end, which is glorious. What is the beginning? Theosophically speaking, the sacrificial lighting up of the human mind by a holy host of dhyanis in ancient Lemuria constitutes the true beginning of the human quest for enlightenment. The alchemical process of emanating monastic self-awareness into receptive pilgrim souls was, in effect, a collective initiation. The illumination of the human mind brought with it self-consciousness, spiritual knowledge, and spontaneous acts of intelligent benevolence. Clearly, the dawning of monastic self-awareness was an initial blessing to all human souls. They felt overwhelming gratitude to the illustrious host who lit them up, and an unbounded reverence to those sons of the fire who instructed them on the ultimate end of spiritual evolution, the conscious realization of the glorious state of adeptship by all, a state of self-mastery, compassion, and spiritual wisdom beyond compare. Seen from this overarching metaphysical perspective, spiritual responsibility is the Fahatic hyphen between the awakening of monadic consciousness on this plane and the sacred resolve to progressively enter into the ocean of omniscience at the end of the seventh planetary round. Understandably, the mental posture of self-accountability for the inward purity of our motive, the beneficent use of our knowledge, and the unshakable courage to accept the consequences of our actions is crucial at every stage of the spiraling involutionary and evolutionary processes. As students of the secret doctrine, we know that many souls misuse the intuitive powers of the third eye in Atlantis, and subsequently lost the power to clearly perceive the path of wise and benevolent action. The loss of spiritual knowledge through pride and perversity precipitated the withdrawal of the mystery fires, so vital to human regeneration. Because of the general absence of spiritual vision and the precipitous consolidation of egotistical consciousness, the sacrificial descent of Buddhas of compassion and of avatars become all the more vital to human regeneration. Sacrificial light-bringers had, and continue to have, the awesome duty of rekindling the flickering fire of monastic self-consciousness, creatively summoning latent altruistic feelings buried in the deepest chambers of the human heart, and reestablishing the soul-saving ethics of spiritual responsibility. Coming to our modern complex world in Kali Yuga, the concept of responsibility seems to have several meanings, but its predominant one is moral responsibility. The latter holds that we are accountable for our intentions, actions, and their determinate consequences. This moral accountability is to conscience as well as to society. It embraces the cognate concepts of obligation and duty. No individual or community can afford to dispense with these essential notions and avoid degenerating into anarchy. They are woven into the very fabric of our moral consciousness, our complex personal and social relationships, and our everyday language. Yet, many in our spiritually materialistic age believe that moral responsibility, obligation, and duty are quote-unquote heavy terms, and rather stifling to a Jupiterian wish to expand the limits of personal freedom, extend the ladder of social mobility, and widen the circumference of political liberty. Moral responsibility, like duty and obligation, is felt to be a concept without joy and without moral attraction, except to the moralist and the self-righteous, who ironically help give it its excessive gravitas. But is this conventional view of moral psychology really true? Isn't there a deep feeling of satisfaction and well-being when one has done one's duty to others, most especially when it was painful to do so? Hasn't the modern mind inverted the moral psychology of human decency and simultaneously reduced the true dignity of what it means to, quote, be human? Yes, it has. In reality, contemporary man does not much care for anything that puts limits on the opportunity to fulfill personal desires. And it is hard for many to imagine how moral restraint and owning up to the cost of our commitments might actually make us much happier and self-fulfilled than would satisfaction of our ever-multiplying wants. To put this differently, few secularists or pleasure-seeking utilitarians would willingly accept Gandhi's belief, put in religious language, that the devil frees us in order to bind us, while God binds us in order to free us. In truth, Gandhi is right on both accounts. However, before turning to a metaphysically richer concept of moral responsibility and its relationship to Christ's dictum, "Be therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect," it is important to grasp the fact that all concepts of human responsibility assume that we are free agents. Our intentions and our actions are not predetermined by either genetics, culture, psychological afflictions, or our environment. We are self-aware, rational, and moral agents. We can rationally think and reflect, deliberate and discuss, debate and decide what we ought to do. We can, in principle, freely assign value and priority to all that we and others do. We can, in a word, choose among rationally conceived and morally appropriate alternatives. What is more, we recognize that all moral choices have consequences, some intended and many not. Regardless of intentions, we are accountable for the effects of what we do, as well as for the acts themselves. Theosophically speaking, there is an ineluctable connection between action and its consequences. The effects are in the cause, as W.Q. Judge teaches us. But most modern secular thinkers do not accept this. Nonetheless, many people recognize that there can be, at times, discernible connections between the character of an action and the character of its effect on man and nature. The moral color of an action and its like complementary effects is believed by many people who do not explicitly espouse a belief in karma and reincarnation. For example, when someone is told that a man known to be extremely jealous is being divorced by his spouse because of that moral illness, he is not surprised. Jealousy, when it is not tempered and controlled, is commonly believed to destroy relationships. This moral truth is richly illustrated in literature, from fairy tales to the plays of Shakespeare. After all, in the play Othello, both Iago and Othello bring about their mutual ruin due to uncontrolled jealousy. A similar moral connection is made in the common mind between inordinate ambition and self-destructive outcomes which affect the community as well as the individual. This is chillingly illustrated in another of Shakespeare's plays, Macbeth. In that tragedy, Lady Macbeth's obsessive political ambition for her husband ultimately leads to both their deaths. Most of humanity understands that we are not only responsible for our own individual acts as such, but must at various times assume responsibility for the actions of others. Very conscientious parents must often assume responsibility for the misbehavior of their children. This is an unofficial code in most cultures, irrespective of established laws. It is, however, less common that a politician of integrity will resign from his official position because of the misdeeds or mistakes of those in his department. When this happens, as it sometimes does in Japan and Great Britain, we consider such morally responsible action exemplary, if not heroic. While all of these examples are pointing in the right direction, as theosophists, we know that the overlapping circles of individual agency and moral responsibility are considerably more extensive than conventional wisdom accepts. Dharma is, in reality, universal and all-encompassing. We are taught that the karmic law of interdependence implies that all actions of all beings at all levels of reality influence, shape, and condition everything for good or for ill. We do not act in isolation. We are all, metaphysically speaking, citizens of a particular polis, of a culturally variegated globe, of our solar system, and of the sevenfold cosmos. As a result, every student who is unconditionally committed to the path of wisdom is in the position to gestate and generate actions that accelerate human growth toward perfectibility, or its opposite. We are capable of affecting society and nature for good or ill. We can be a blessing or a curse to ourselves and to others. We can use our insights, our experiences, and our knowledge in ways that are compatible with intellectual and moral growth, or with intellectual and moral retardation. The enemy of moral responsibility is not so much immorality as it is rationalization. The latter is the act of justifying actions known to be wrong or detrimental to oneself or others. For example, President Lincoln, in a perceptive speech, pointed out that slave owners, while often rational and ethical in certain respects, eventually disfigure their personalities and warp their power of reason. Why? Because they continually justify slavery by quoting the Bible and by giving endless moral excuses for mistreating Black Americans in general. In addition to being rational and moral agents, human beings are uniquely self-surpassing due to monastic mobility. We are therefore capable of appropriate acts of self-correction and atonement without guilt. This means that while we are capable of hitting the mark in action, we are still mistake-prone and subject to falling short of our highest ideals. For this reason, to err is indeed human, but to cheerfully correct is truly divine. As we might sense, spiritual responsibility rests upon the more demanding assumption that all human beings are immortal souls, creatively engaged in a divine pilgrimage for self-realization over myriads of lifetimes, all under the self-regulating law of universal justice. This expansive concept of responsibility includes the whole person, the entirety of the sevenfold individual. Spiritual responsibility, then, is not just a matter of observing conventional virtues, of adhering to exacting moral codes, of deferring to inherited cultural mores, or of conforming to statutory laws. It potentially includes all of these and more. It embraces the inner man, his sublimest thoughts, finest feelings, and most selfless desires, as well as his conforming personal and social conduct. The recognition that we are rational and moral agents of a higher ontological order is integral to the profound, enigmatic process of individuation, of gaining spiritual insights and consciously cooperating with the altruistic dictates of the inner ruler in its Promethean quest to alleviate human ignorance and suffering. In classical Hinduism, For example, the third and most pivotal of the four aims in life is Dharma, what we might call moral responsibility or moral self-regulation. Dharma is bound up with ancient teachings on right living in its most comprehensive sense. Therefore, when fundamental moral rules are consistently observed in all relationships and in every stage of life, then Dharma is sustaining not only the individual and the community, but the cosmos as well. It regulates and goes beyond pleasure and wealth, aims 1 and 2 respectively. It is vital to the life cycle because moral self-regulation is key to the possibility of realizing nirvana, or nirvanic bliss, the fourth aim in this life. Thus, the deepest spiritual ananda, our ineffable joy, and the greatest ontological wealth can only be gained through cultivating the most human of all qualities, moral responsibility, or our self-chosen duty to man and to the cosmos. The challenge for us as Theosophists is that we cannot act responsibly in this richer metaphysical sense unless we dare to see ourselves in larger terms. To feel ourselves responsible and responsive to all that lives and breathes, we must engage in perhaps the greatest Dharma of all. That is, we must be willing to plumb the depths of the metapsychological question, quote, "Who am I?" unquote. We must patiently inch our way beyond mere intellectual formulations or conceptual clarity, as valuable as they are. What we might ask is involved in our reconceptualizing ourselves, such that we could periodically negate and even transcend our circumscribed personality for the sake of lokasangraha, our universal uplift. If we were truly able, like Shiva Nataraj, to put the demon of the separative animal self under our foot, we could quite possibly measure up to Gandhi's gold standard of morally responsible action. Namely, learning to reduce our ego to a zero, when and where it is most needed to enact the uncommon good. In Gandhian terms, the courage to reduce the ego to a cipher at will is crucial in a universe in which human beings are either sinking or soaring, spiraling upward or spiraling downward. Meditation, self-study, and responsible action may be the triadic, talismanic keys to radical self-transformation and its reciprocal correlate, social uplift. Meditation seems to be about self-gestation. It is about awakening a latent self that is untouched, unmodified, and untainted by the trials and tribulations of the embodied consciousness. It is a self which is luminous and omnipotent. It cannot, however, directly descend into embodied consciousness. Nonetheless, its proximate presence does irradiate the mind and can purify the whole person. Through the agency of a focused manas, free of the gravitational pull of kama, compassionate meditation may gestate over lifetimes the highest virtues and activate creative centers in the human brain-mind. Tellingly, sustained monastic meditation eventually reveals the path of intuitive right action when it fuses with buddhi. Meditation, without recurring self-scrutiny, is, however, liable to be impotent in its influence on moral character and the development of skillful action in society. Our spiritual insights and philosophical breakthroughs are easily deflected and refracted within the labyrinth of our passion-filled brain-mind. The Pythagorean mode of nightly self-study, however, is the analytic nexus between meditative states and right action in daily life. It helps us to plant seed ideas, pull up noxious vices, and cultivate desirable virtues or moral vices so that the waters of wisdom may flow into the fertile mind. Looked at another way, self-examination helps us visualize the dialectical relationship between theoria and practice. It is crucial to the dynamics of integrating knowledge with the ever-shifting needs of communal relationships. To review our daily actions 3 times each night in light of sacred principles eventually leads to sophrosyne, rational self-control of thought, speech, and conduct in society. It makes it possible to become one's own spiritual biographer without excuse or exaggerated expectations. Meditation and self-study are incomplete unless they lead to right action or the skillful performance of duty. When the mind, purified by devotional meditation, puts its whole attention on its daily Dharma, it builds moral consistency. In time, the thread of moral consistency activates higher meditative states, which build the permanent astral, the vehicle of progressive spiritual perfection. The permanent astral bridges lifetimes and permits one to experience the, quote, I am I, unquote, consciousness, even while in a body with an assumed personality. There is, in effect, noetic agency without kama manasic identity. One has successfully unselfed the mind. While the above is one of many ways of speaking about cultivating spiritual responsibility, it is woefully incomplete. It is not possible to find, much less walk the path of wisdom sacrifice, without a spiritual teacher or guide. The latter provides us with wisdom teachings or spiritual cartographies of the mind. But what is more, a guru prepares us for the trials passing speech, referred to in the voice. He necessarily aids us in ways invisible, but merited. He does so on planes of consciousness beyond our immediate awareness, including deep sleep. The guru-chela relationship is said to be the paradigm of all human relationships and the sublimest form of mutual spiritual responsibility. It holds forth the possibility of a mental second birth that supersedes ordinary birth in a physical vesture. A second mental spiritual birth means that regardless of one's actual stage of life, one is now inwardly a sannyasi, a homeless wanderer who has transcended name and form. Such a being resides in the state of Soham, I am he. His consciousness is fused with the Guru's, which is said to be attuned to the Logos. His consciousness has become radiant, impersonal, compassionate, and drenched in the elixir of mental devotion to one's Ishta Guru, who assumed the awesome obligation of being one's guide and adjuster on the steep path to enlightened service. And like Shantideva, the grateful and responsible Chela may become, in time, an active member of the Buddha family, who engages in bodhisattva training and the sovereign dialectic of divine wisdom and compassionate service, the magic of Buddha Yoga. In conclusion, we might say that we all live in a cosmos of interlaced intelligences, of different orders of consciousness, mind, and matter. We're never really alone. We affect man and nature with every breath that we take. Conversely, we are all influenced by the actions of multitudinous denizens of the swirling worlds within and without us. Under the law of harmony, all our actions and reactions emanate influences that impress themselves on man and the cosmos. Thus, as we learn the law of harmony through meditation, self-study, and loving deeds, we increasingly assume responsibility for the acts and conditions of others. We consciously refuse to separate ourselves from them. We spontaneously identify with the suffering and deprivations of of others, especially those members of the human family who are without, quote, a teacher, hope, or consolation, unquote. In this more comprehensive view of responsibility, we are required to restrain our excuse-making, cowardly, pushy self and become heroic agents of the inner man, which itself is inseparable from the brotherhood of bodhisattvas, who live on the exalted planes of logoic ideation. In a word, we are obliged to increasingly forget ourselves as we quietly enter into the spacious domain of selfless, responsible service. Thank you.